So welcome everyone to today's session, the Forge Online Bootcamp. So this is now the second day this week out of a 4-day event. If you attended the event yesterday, then this first session during the day will be pretty much exactly the same, because in a way, the way you have to set up your environment, make sure you have a Forge account, those steps are all exactly the same. So just letting you know. But I will go through the exact same things like yesterday as well, in case you need a refresh. So about the event itself, it's a 4 days event during the week. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Each day we have a tutorial that we are going through, divided into 4 different sessions. And during the sessions, I'm going to take you through the tutorial, the material in the tutorial, the various steps. I'm going to do the steps myself as well, so you can try to follow me as well as I'm doing it, or just wait for me to finish and then do it yourself. There will be plenty of time between the sessions for you to go through everything, which is discussed in the tutorial pages, and then try to implement those yourself. And then, of course, I will always be in the background all throughout the day to answer your questions. If you run into any problems, I will try to help you. So that's what between sessions are. Whenever I'm not doing anything, I'm there, and then in the Q&A panel, you can ask questions. And again, because people tend to ask this, so all sessions will be recorded and then will be provided later on. I think the plan is that we will send out an email about it, but definitely I would assume we are going to be writing about it on our blog, which is on forge.autodesk.com/blog. So yesterday we were talking about the simpler viewer, in which case we were using the lowest level of the storage services, which means that you have your application and then you can create your own private bucket where you can upload your files. This bucket is completely independent of anything else, from BIM 360, Fusion Team, or anything other than that. It is assigned to your application that you created, and only you have access to it. Even its name needs to be globally unique. So that's what happened yesterday. That's where you uploaded your file, and then using model derivative service, you got it translated to SVF format, which then our viewer that you can embed in your web page can display. In today's session, we are going to be looking at how to access existing storage accounts like ACC, BIM 360 Docs, or Fusion Team. So if you have such an account already, you are storing files there, and you want to automate something, or just you want to have your own web page displaying models from that website, then today's session will be about that, how to access those hubs, projects, folders, subfolders, have access to all those files, and then also display them in the viewer. And then tomorrow will be specific to the viewer. So therefore, we'll only have a single session because it will be focusing on the client side aspect, which is the viewer SDK itself. So it's a JavaScript SDK. And so, it won't be divided into a .NET section or a Node.js section. It will be just focusing on the client side aspect of things. So it will show you how you can add extensions to the viewer. That's the way you can extend the functionality of the viewer and create, for example, dashboards based on the information that we extracted from the original models. And then Thursdays, we'll talk about configurators, how you can create in Autodesk specific file formats, Inventor, Revit, AutoCAD, 3ds Max, or modify existing ones, and then or just do some investigation of the model with the given desktop API available to you. So when you're using this design automation service, then you will be creating something similar to an add-in on the desktop side, but that add-in will be running on our servers. So you can take advantage of the full API of the given desktop product, like Revit API, Inventor API, AutoCAD API. So that's for Thursday. But today it's about hubs and browsers, and you chose, if you're here, the .NET session. As I said, there's a Node.js session running in parallel with this one as well that you can attend depending on which programming language and environment you prefer. So this is about hubs and browsers.NET. Here's the link to the tutorial. So this is our new and simplified tutorial that we created. So it's brand new. We tried to make it as simple as possible. So Forge -tutorials, Autodesk.io tutorials, hubs browser. And if you go there, so this is the page, Forge tutorials, Autodesk.io, and then you will see the various samples that we have. And today we'll go through this one, the hubs browser, and there's also a small GIF, displaying the result that we are going to be ending up with. So again, on the left side, just listing the hubs, projects, folders and files, and then you can just click on any of the files you're interested in, and we are going to be showing it inside the viewer. And on the top right corner, you see the logout button or the login button. So that's how the whole thing starts actually. So when you click the login button, we are going to redirect you to the Autodesk login page, the Forge login page, where you can log in with your Autodesk account. And once the user approved your application's access to that data, then they will be redirected back to our application. And then we will have the access token and then can access the data management API to, get a list of all the hubs, projects, and everything the user has access to. So just like yesterday, the sessions are divided up in a similar fashion. So this very first session is just intro and setup. Make sure you have the environment in order to get started with the sample itself. And then we have some dedicated break and Q&A sections. But as I said, I'm going to be online throughout the day. So I'm there to answer your questions whenever they arise. But the first session is, so now 8 to 9, so it's in GMT, which again might be a bit confusing because at the moment I don't think anyone is using GMT. Even in the UK we are using BST, which is British Summer Time, which is GMT +1. In Europe they are using Central European Summer Time, which is GMT +2. So you just have to calculate with those and hopefully you won't get confused. Yeah, so this is the session running now. In 1.5 hours time there will be another session, and after 1.5 hours time there will be another one and another one. So these are the sections that we are going to be covering. So the first one is just intro and setup now, then getting started with the sample, creating the new sample, dealing with the authentication part, then using the data management API in session 3 to get a list of all the hubs, projects, everything the user has access to. And then session 4 will be about adding the UI elements and of course the viewer itself, and then presenting the model inside the viewer. So this is the timeline for today. So session 1 right now, what do you need to do in order to get started? Again, it's exactly the same like session 1 yesterday. This is just about making sure you have everything installed and you have the accounts ready to use with the application that we are going to be going through. So first of all, create a Forge account. You simply have to go to forge.autodesk.com and then log in with your Autodesk ID. And then you can create new applications, Forge applications. And as soon as you create that application, you will be presented with client ID and client secret for the application. And those are the two things we are going to be needing today. And if you want to work with one of the BIM 360 storages, ACC or BIM 360 docs, then you also need to provision access to them. For Fusion Team, you don't actually. So I'm not sure why we wrote it here. So you only need to provision access for ACC and BIM 360 docs access. And that is also covered in the tutorials part. I'm going to show you now in a second. And then the last step is installing Visual Studio Community 2022. This should be a free version of this programming environment that you can download and run. The only thing you have to make sure of is that you add these two parts, the ASP.NET web development and .NET desktop development. Yeah, so let's just go through everything here. So first of all, the getting started part in the tutorials, it will direct you to the forgeautodesk.com website, where you can then log in, sign in with your account. And just to point it out, if you click on the documentation part, then you will have access to the full list of the components currently available to the public, including authentication. That's one of the components that you will always need to use, because obviously you need to authenticate with Forge in order to get an access token, which then you can use to take advantage of the rest of the services. And all these services are server-side, apart from a couple of them, which means that they are RESTful. So you just simply need to send HTTP requests to them in order to interact with them. Apart from the Viewer SDK, which is a fully client-side SDK, it's a JavaScript SDK for our viewer that you can embed in your own web page. And the other part is data visualization, which has both server-side and client-side components. It has, for example, a couple of viewer extensions that can be used inside the viewer. But the rest of these are all, server-side APIs. So server-side services with the RESTful APIs. And today we are going to use quite a few of them, just like yesterday. So also the authentication for sure, because you always need that. But beyond that, we also need the data management in order to get access to all the hubs, projects, and the rest that the user has inside our storage services, so that data management. And I think today we are not using model derivative because, well, in case of at least BIM 360 and ACC docs, when you upload a file, those are automatically translated. So you don't even have to request the translation yourself. In case of Fusion Team, though, you would have to get it translated yourself, or you would need to view the file in the Fusion Team web interface. So if you go to the website for Fusion, your Fusion Team account, and you look at one of the files, there as well, we have the Forge viewer embedded in that web page. And when you click on viewing any of the files, they will automatically get translated. So you won't need to use model derivative service to translate those files to SVF. So I don't think we'll use this today, but we'll definitely use Viewer SDK because, again, just like yesterday, we are going to be embedding the viewer in our web page. So this is what happens if you haven't used Forge already, you haven't started your trial, then you can click on the sign up to try Forge. You can try that. And then once your trial started, it lasts for about 3 months, and you also get 100 cloud credits, I think, with it, that you can use up, for example, for translation services if you wanted, or try the other services like the design automation APIs. And when you create your app, then you only need to provide a couple of pieces of information, like the app name. You can provide some description for the app. And in today's session, you have to make sure that the callback URL is exactly what our application will be using as well. So this callback URL could be, anything. You just have to make sure it's exactly the same as the one being used by the application. And in today's sample, we are going to be going with this, which is listed here as well. So we are going to be running the sample on the 8080 port locally when testing the app. And then the callback will be API auth callback. So you have to make sure that you are using exactly this. Just stick with HTTP as well instead of HTTPS. So basically just copy this address directly from here and use that for the callback URL that you're providing. And then by default, I think all the components will be selected. So there are various, additional layers of security with Forge, just like probably with other services. It's probably very similar. So one of them is the selection of the APIs. So when you're creating a Forge app, you can select which components you want to enable. So let's say you only want to handle webhooks with your application. Then if you only enable that, then even if somehow your client ID, client secret gets exposed to unwanted third parties, even then they won't be able to do anything else with them apart from the API that you selected. So they won't have suddenly access to like your Fusion team account or start running design automation jobs that you would be paying for. It's impossible because you only selected, for example, webhooks API to deal with various events happening on Forge. So that's just one layer of security. But by default, especially just when following this tutorial, you can select all of these for the time being, and just to be on the safe side. Because if by by accident you don't select one of the components that we do need, like the data management API, then your application won't be working. So, and as you can see straight away, once you click the Create App button, you will be presented with client ID, client secret. You don't even have to unhide this value in order to get access to it. You can just simply double click inside, those dots in the middle of the edit box. You can double click and it will get copied, and then you can store the client secret value somewhere else. For example, paste it directly into the application that we are going to be creating today. And here's the section discussing, how to provision your app that you created yesterday or maybe today, in order to access hubs and projects from BIM 360 or ACC accounts. So unfortunately, in order to do that, you would need to be an admin, an account admin. And then it will take you through, how you can do that. You click on account administration, and then go to the settings, and then you can just add custom integrations, and you will need to provide the client ID of the Forge application that you just created to provision it for the given ACC or BIM 360 account. So you have to go through that. If you're using Fusion Team, then you don't need to do that. Or if you still have like BIM 360 Teams account, don't confuse it with BIM 360 Docs. Those are completely different. So even in BIM 360 Teams, I don't think you have to provision your account. Or if you happen to have A360, I'm not even sure if it's still available, then you wouldn't need to go through these steps. So these steps are only for ACC and BIM 360 from this onwards, this part, the provision access in other products. So once you started your Forge account, you created your app. Now let's set up the environment. And because you seem to be interested in the .NET development part, and in our experience, most of the .NET developers are actually working with, Autodesk desktop products already, like creating add-ins for Revit or Inventor or AutoCAD. They tend to be more familiar with Visual Studio instead of Visual Studio Code. So that's why we are going with this today as well. So make sure that is selected for you inside the environment setup, the .NET 6 and Visual Studio 2022. And then it will provide you the link from where you can download Visual Studio Community Edition. And then again, just make sure that these two components are selected when you're installing Visual Studio, the ASP.NET and web development and .NET desktop development. And I think that's all for this first session. So now it's your turn. You have to go through these steps: create Forge account, Forge app credentials, provision access. If you want to deal with BIM 360 or ACC accounts, you want to be able to access hubs and projects from there. And then make sure you have installed Visual Studio Community Edition 2022. And then I will be answering your questions in the meantime. Yeah, welcome back. So we can continue with the next session for today. So hopefully you managed to go through these steps, create Forge account, which will provide you with your credentials. And also in case of BIM 360 or ACC, if that's what you want to access with today's sample, then you also need to provision your Forge application for the given account and then installed Visual Studio 2022. And now we can get started with the application itself. Just like I showed this diagram yesterday as well. So it's the same thing. Many applications or web applications and services are structured this way. Is that first of all, on the right side, we have the Forge services that we want to interact with, even for like, accessing the authentication service, the data management service, or the model derivative service. And we'll have all the files, of course, related to our project will be kept on the server side, including the HTML, JavaScript, CSS files, maybe images, and other things as well, which will then be available for the browser in order to present our web page to the user. And apart from doing that, providing these files, on the server side, we are also going to be exposing endpoints for the client side, so that the client side will be able to call the given endpoint on our server, and in return, our server will reach out to Forge, fetch the data that was required by the client, and pass it back to the client. And why we do that is because we want to keep, the client side, the client ID and client secret. Definitely do not want to expose that to the client side. But also we do not want to expose an access token, which has loads of scopes enabled. So scopes are, again, one layer of security, additional layer of security that we are using. Probably other services are using them as well. So depending on what kind of functionality you want to do with Forge, whether it's just displaying viewables in the viewer, or you want to be able to list the buckets you have available, the files in them, or download files, upload files, delete files, and so on. They all require different kinds of scopes. And in order to, hide such a powerful access token, which would be able to like create buckets and delete files or download existing files, we keep that access token on the server side. That's what we call like an internal token. As part of the tutorial, we'll discuss this as well. But since this diagram is here, it's probably easier to talk about it. So we'll have two access tokens. One, what we call like an internal access token, which have all these privileges in order to, as I said, interact with Forge, get a list of all the hubs, and maybe download files and so on. And we'll have a public facing access token, which only will have the one scope enabled, which is the viewables read. So with that access token, even if it gets exposed to the wrong people on the client side, they will have access to it. Even then, the only thing they will be able to do is that if they have the exact URL of a given file, they will be able to view it inside the viewer. They won't be able to download the original file or modify it or upload different things or do anything else. That's the only thing they would be able to do with it. And that's why all these requests related to, for example, getting the list of hubs and projects and files are all going through our server side, because the server side will have that specific internal token that we are going to be using to interact with Forge. It's not going to be exposed to the client side. So instead, we are just exposing endpoints on our server that the client will be able to call, just like this get token endpoint, which will retrieve the client side facing, the public access token, which will only have that given scope that I mentioned before, viewables read. So that's going to be available through an endpoint as well that we are exposing. Yesterday, we were using two-legged authentication because in that case, we were creating only creating buckets, which are private to your own Forge application, it's not related to anything else, to Bin 360, Fusion Team, or anything. Those buckets are specific to the given Forge app that you created on our website. And therefore, it was really simple. 2 legs being your application, who is requesting an access token, and then the Forge services being the second leg, which providing the access token. And there you only had to provide the client ID, client secret, send the request to our server, and you got back straight away an access token that you could start using straight away. 3-legged authentication is a bit more complicated because now we have 3 legs. The 3 legs being your application, Forge services, and also the user who needs to approve your application's access to their data. And the workflow for that is a bit more complicated as well, as you can see from the diagram. So it's not just a single call. What you have to do instead in this specific case is when your application wants to access a user's data, then first your application needs to redirect the user in the browser, or redirect the browser to the login page, to the Autodesk login page, where the user can log in with their Autodesk ID or Autodesk account. And there they have the chance to enable your application to access their data. They can approve it. They click the button, yes, I'm going to enable this application's access to my data. And if that happens, in return, then that web page is going to redirect the browser back to the callback URL that you provided when you made that redirection. And this callback URL needs to be exactly the same that you were using in your Forge application as well. When you created the Forge application on the forge.autodesk.com website under /my apps, then you needed to provide a callback URL. And that callback URL needs to be exactly the same that we provided when we were redirecting the user to the login page. And once the login page from Autodesk redirected the browser back to our page, then it will also contain a code, which then we can use to send another request to Forge services in order to turn that code into an actual access token that we can use later on to interact with other Forge services. So yeah, it's a bit more involved than a simple 2-legged authentication. And this is what we are going to be implementing today. And the application setup, this is similar to what we were doing today, but as I mentioned in the break, make sure that you're creating a new app from scratch. You're not trying to continue with the app, with the Visual Studio project that we created yesterday. Create a new one from scratch today, because the code will be different. And if you start mixing the 2 tutorials together, then you will end up with something that doesn't work. So just do create a brand new project today as well. And how you do it, you open up Visual Studio 2022, create a new project. There are a couple of things you will have to do. All the steps I'm going to be going through in a second. You have to install the dependencies, some of the NuGet packages. Then prepare app configuration. We will create a startup CS file. And we have to add also the credentials we will be using to the app settings.development.json. And then create a basic server. We are going to be modifying the program.cs file. And after that, we can also test that the application is running as expected. And then as a second step, we are going to be implementing the authentication part. So this is going to be implementing this 3-legged authentication I just talked about, redirecting the user to the Autodesk login page. And then in return, that's going to be redirecting the user back to our page. And for that, we also need to implement some endpoints. So those are going to be going in the authentication controller.cs file. And after this step as well, we can test it out to make sure it's working. So let's get back to this sample here. Yeah, sometimes it takes a bit of time to get started. So you can go back to the tutorials page and click on Hubs and Browser. This just gives an overview of what we are going to be implementing. Then you can click on Application Setup. Make sure you're selecting this step, which is .NET 6 and Visual Studio 2022, because those are the steps you're going to be following. So today as well, we are going to be creating an ASP.NET Core empty project. So we can just start up Visual Studio 2022. I'm not sure if it's starting or not. Sometimes, sometimes it's a bit slow. I might just simply end up with two instances now because I was a bit impatient. We'll see what happens. But then you click on create a new project. And the easiest way for me to find that specific project type that we want to use is if I search for empty. Just have to wait for it to, find itself. Yeah, because I'm on a Mac machine, I'm using Parallels, and maybe I just paused it for a while, so it slowed down a bit. That might not be helping either. Come on. If it starts doing anything, maybe it triggers. Something. Yeah, at last. So the easiest way is if you just simply type in empty, and you will find ASP.NET Core empty. That's the project we want to use. Make sure you follow the exact steps, because if you, for example, name the application different or do something a bit different, you might end up with something a bit different. So, and who knows if that might cause some confusion. So the best thing is just to follow the steps exactly as they are. So, for example, the name My Forge app, let's just go with that. My Forge app. And we are not going to be needing HTTPS because, it's just a sample that we are going to be playing with locally. So we don't, this is just an extra thing that we would have to take care of. And then we are using the .NET 6 version. You can also always just double check that you're following everything as it should be. Yeah. Looks good. Uh-oh. That's interesting. I don't know what happened there. It seemed like it crashed, but fortunately it didn't. So here's the project we ended up with. And now we can start adding content to it. First of all, just like yesterday, we are going to be adding a couple of folders that's going to be organizing the various files and content we are going to be adding to the project. The controllers, this folder will contain all the functionality related to exposing endpoints on our server that the client-side code from JavaScript will be able to call. And then the models folder will be containing all the functionality related to communicating with the Forge services directly from our server. And www-root contains everything which we will make available for the browser, including HTML files, JavaScript, CSS that the browser will be able to download in order to present the web page to the user. So these are the three main folders we need to create. So we can go back here, right click on the project, add new folder. So one is controllers, then one is models. And when you name the www root folder, also the icon should turn into a globe. That's how you know you did not make a typo in the name of this specific folder. And then we need to install the Forge SDK as well. So inside the Solution Explorer, you can just right click as you see it here in order to manage the NuGet packages that we will be using. And the only package we will be using is the Autodesk Forge package, because we are using .NET framework, well, .NET Core or .NET 6.0. Now, I don't think they are using in the naming .NET Core or .NET Framework. Now, the two lines have been now united. So, but because we are using the latest version, therefore we can just use the latest version of the various packages as well. So you can click on Browse. Again, it's acting a bit slow. And then just type in Autodesk the Forge, and then the very first hit will be the one we need. And as I said, you can just simply go with the latest version of it. So click Install, accept this message, just click OK. And you can see some messages in the bottom, but I think it should be ready to be used. And now we can start adding things to the project. First of all, we are going to be adding a startup.cs file. So just click on the project itself and add new item. Let's go with the class. So select class and then just rename it straight away here. So it's going to be called startup.cs. Click add. And now you can just simply copy the content from here. As you can see, it just sets certain things up, including fetching the Forge client ID, client secret, and callback URL that we are going to be using from our configuration file. And then also set up things for our web service as well, like presenting the static files directly, the HTML page, and the rest which are required by the browser, and also exposing the endpoints that we are going to be using. So let's just select everything here and then just overwrite it. Make sure you save everything. You can also find some information about what this startup file is doing here. And then we can go to the app settings.development.json file. Again, just a bit of note why we are providing these credentials here instead of somewhere else. So that, if, once you have these projects and then you store them in GitHub, you don't accidentally, include, for example, this file. You can just simply exclude this file from being uploaded to GitHub, so you won't, by accident, expose your client ID and client secret to third parties, because that wouldn't be very good. So all I have to do is just copy these 3 lines from here, because the other section should be already there. So this is the app settings.development.json. And I can just add comma and then add these things there. And now I should fill these in from my application. I'm not sure if I'm logged in already. I can try to log in quickly. So I have a temp on here. So even if I expose the client secret, it's not an issue. You can always actually modify your client secret later on. You can click this regenerate. That's going to change the client secret. And then, if by accident you exposed it somewhere, that's one way of making sure that you're still safe. So I have that there. And now we can create a basic server. We are going to be modifying the content of the program CS file. So we can just simply copy this content from here. And then just overwrite it here. Again, make sure you're saving everything because sometimes it doesn't happen and you don't want to lose all the changes you've done so far. And there's one more thing we need to modify is the application URL. Because as you've seen, we're going to be running our sample on the 8080 port. So we have to update that. And that should be inside the loan settings.json file. Under properties. So loan settings.json, you can see by default it's using something different. And at the moment, there's nothing much to see, just like yesterday, after this very first step, the only thing you will see that your application will be running, but since you haven't implemented any web pages just yet, we don't have an HTML page to present to the user. Therefore, when the browser is going directly to the root of our web app, then of course there's nothing to present. It's going to say 404, so file not found. But still, we should be able to see that. So I just have to wait for Visual Studio to start up Chrome for me. Yeah, and as expected, currently we are getting a 404. So let's just continue. There's one more step for this session. Next part is the authentication. And as I said, this time around, it will be a bit more complicated than last time. So first of all, let's create a Forge service CS files. So these Forge services will contain all the implementation related to communicating directly from our server with Forge. They will be all placed under the models subfolder. So I can just click on models, right click, add new item and select class again, and then just rename it here. So these will be partial classes, meaning that the content of the class will be divided into multiple files, as you will see in a second. So this will be the main section, which is just forgeservice.cs. That, for example, will keep the client ID, client secret, and callback URL that we will be working with. Again, just click on copying the content, come here, select everything, and then simply replace it. With the code from the web page. And now we can start adding the various sections to it. First of all, in this part of the session, we are only dealing with the authentication part. So we can also create another file, another part with containing the rest of this class is implementation. So again, just right click on models, add new item, class, and copy the content from here. So replace everything inside the newly created file. Yeah, so you can see the various functionality that we are implementing. So using the Forge SDK, from the NuGet package that we added to our project, here are the things that we are calling. So first of all, we have a three-legged API, authorize. So this will provide the client side with the actual authorization URL that the user needs to be redirected to. And that will also contain the information of the callback URL, where, after the user logged in with their account, then that service can redirect the browser back to our application. So this will provide that URL. And this is about generating tokens. So once we got we got redirected, the user got redirected from the login page back to our site, then we can turn that code that we got, we can turn that code into an actual access token. And that will be providing us with an internal access token. As I said, we are going to be working with two, just like yesterday, internal token, which is kept on the server side, not exposed to the client side. And then there's will be the public token, public access token, that we are going to be passing down to the client so that the viewer will be able to use that token in order to display the model, fetch the model from Forge and then display it in the browser. And this is how you can generate that public access token. So is that you already have the internal access token that we did. And this time around, you're going to be using a different scope and then generate a new access token. And this public token scope will only include the viewables : read scope. So it will be very, very limited. And then we also have a refresh tokens functionality. If, whenever is needed, we can generate new tokens, as the need arises. As I said, mentioned yesterday, but probably didn't mention it just today so far, is that when you create an access token, they tend to be active for like an hour. And after that, you would need to generate a new access token. And what you can do, without having to ask the user to log in again, redirect the user to the login page again, and the user would need to log in. So to avoid that, once you have an access token, you can also generate a new access token. Even in case of a three-legged access token, you can generate a new one without user interaction, simply by providing the access token and the refresh token to Forge and calling a specific endpoint, which will provide us with the new refresh token and the new access token that we can use. And then one last functionality is just getting information about the user who logged in. That will be provided here. I think we will probably get back maybe the icon for the user as well. So again, all this functionality inside the models folder will be about interacting with Forge services directly from our server. And then we will also need to expose some endpoints, but it seems to be coming a bit later. So first, let's just update the startup CS file with some additional things. Yes, so we are exposing now our services there. So this is the only thing you need to add to startup CS. You can just copy this section if you want. So whenever you only need to modify just a certain part of a given file, we are going to be highlighting it in the tutorials webpage. So you can just copy that and then go back to startup, and you can actually double check that everything is as it should be. Everything seems to be fine. So we just need to add this extra line here and then save. And now we are going to be exposing the endpoint that will also be needed when the browser is redirecting from the login page back to our application. Our server application needs to handle that by exposing an endpoint. So what we can do is now we can add our first controller class. All the controllers will be placed inside the controllers folder. So you can just right click there, add the new item, again a class, but we rename it to auth controller. And then you can just take all the code from here and replace it. And here you can then check all the various endpoints that we are exposing. So all of these endpoints will be under API/OAuth because that's the name of the controller. So let's see what we have here. We have a get. So we will have a login page, which will provide the client-side code with the authorization URL that it can redirect the user to. We also have a logout page when we are just deleting cookies with information about public token and the rest. And this is the callback URL that the login page is going to be redirecting back the user to, once they logged in with their Autodesk account. And there we are going to be fetching from that URL the code, which then we can turn into an access token. So we're also exposing a profile endpoint where we can get information about the user who's logged in. And this will be giving back the public token for the client-side code, which then we can use with the viewer. So we can pass this public access token to the viewer, and then the viewer will be using it when interacting with the Forge services directly in order to fetch the SVF content so that it can display our model directly inside the browser. So that's all that this specific file and class is going to be exposing to the client side. Yeah, so you can also just find some information about all this here as well. And then we should be able to try things out. But of course, again, the root is not going to be found because we still haven't implemented any user interface so far, no HTML files. So instead of just directing the user to the root, we'll have to direct them to somewhere else. So this should be this. And we just have to make sure that also we have the Forge callback URL is correct in the app settings.development.json. So that seems okay. So let's just run it and let's see what happens. So when you start running it, of course, it's going to build the whole project. And once that's done, then it will start it. Yeah, so as I said, the root should still be 404, that's expected. But let's see what happens if we are going to the login. It says it's invalid redirect URL, so I will definitely have to check what redirect URL I set in the application that I'm using, if it's exactly what it should be, because I think it should have redirected to the correct page. So I can just double check it here. Yeah, it's because by default, it's still set to the callback URL, which the old sample used to use. So I just have to update it here. There you go, save. And now let's run the application again. So let's try once more. So localhost 8080 API auth login. So this should redirect the user to the specific login page, and something is still not right there. I don't know why. I will have to double check. Maybe it just takes a bit of time for the changes that I made to take effect. Oh, wait a second. Did I actually save it? Yeah, I did save it. So localhost 8080 API auth login. I provided the wrong thing. So it should have been this callback URL, as you can see it here. So it's been URL encoded. That's why it looks a bit funny, because all these forward slashes have been turned into a %3a, percentage, or %2fs. All these forward slashes. It should have been API OAuth callback that I provided for my application. So OAuth callback. Back. Okay, well, let's try once more. Third time lucky. Because this endpoint is actually for the user, That's not the callback URL. So API OAuth login, and now this time around we succeeded. So now I should be able to log in. Let's just try something. I wonder if it's correct or not. I don't know it off the top of my head, if I already updated the things on Parallels as well. Yeah, so this is what the user is going to be presented with. So again, this is the three-legged authentication. The user starts up your web page, goes to your web page, and when you want the user to log in so that you can get an access token, then you need to redirect them to a specific web page on the Autodesk site, where they can log in with their Autodesk ID, and then they will be presented with the scopes that you want enabled for the given access token. So view your data, view your viewables. These are the things we are requesting. And then the user can decide if they want to allow the given apps to access those things or not. And if they click allow, then the user is going to be redirected back to the application, back to your application, or in this case, our application, back to the root. But of course, because the user interface is still not built in case of our app just yet, therefore we are still getting an HTTP error 404 file not found. So, but everything seems to be okay. The user was redirected to the correct web page, was allowed to log in with their Autodesk ID and authorize our app's access to the data, and then redirected back to our web page. So everything seems to be working fine. So now this is your turn again, to go through these steps, creating the application again from scratch. Please do not try to continue with the Visual Studio project we created yesterday. Create a brand new one today, because the code will be quite different. So once we've done that, we also added the authentication logic, the services that will be interacting with the Forge services directly from our server, and also exposed some endpoint for both the client side and also for the Forge side, where the user can be redirected back to. So these are all the things that happened in this session. So now it's your turn to implement those. And of course, if you have any questions, then just, message me in the Q&A panel, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Welcome back. I hope you managed to complete these steps. So you set up your application, created a new Visual Studio project, modified the configuration file, added your credentials, and then implemented authentication, and everything is working as I showed. At each step you can test your application to make sure everything is done correctly. And now we get to session 3. So first of all, just a bit of overview about the layers of the storage service. So yesterday, this is what we were playing with, the object storage service. This is the lowest level. This is where actually all the binaries are stored, even in case of the other storage services like Fusion Team, Bin360 Docs, and the others. So under all those layers, at the bottom layer, there is the object storage service, where there are various buckets where all the binaries are stored, just like we were doing it yesterday. You know, you can create a bucket and start uploading files there so that you will be able to translate them to other file formats, including SVF, so that you will be able to display them inside the viewer. And on top of that, there are these other services. There's first of all the project service, which will give you the hubs and projects in case of Bin360, Fusion Team, and the other Autodesk storage services. And under that, there's the data service, which enables you to further organize your data into folders, subfolders, items, meaning the files, and versions for each of those files. So at this point, we are going to be adding these to our application. We need logic for browsing the hubs. Again, we are adding a Forge service called forgeservice.hubs.cs, which will be implementing the functionality using the Forge Sdk that we got through the NuGet package in order to communicate directly from the server to the Forge services to get a list of all the hubs that the user has access to. And then we also need to expose this through an endpoint for the client-side code. So, you know, our client-side code, the JavaScript code is running inside the browser, and this will be able to call the specific endpoint that we are implementing here under the controllers in order to get access to this kind of functionality, you know, get a list of all the hubs, projects, and the rest that the user has access to. After that, we will just test the solution. Yeah, so that's it. So it's just a single part. So we can go back to the tutorial and find the data browsing section. Here again, there is the overview with the diagram that I was showing to you now. So first of all, we are going to be extending the service class that we already created and add functionality related to hubs to it. We can go back here, and all the services are in the models folder. So you can just right click. You can just right click on the models, add new item, select the class, rename it. You can fetch the content from here. Just simply click on the copy. Let's have a look at what we have here. So again, we are using the Forge SDK, as you can see. First of all, we are implementing a function in order to get back all the hubs that the user has access to. Each time we need to, of course, provide the access token as well. So whenever you're interacting with any of the Forge APIs, server-side APIs, you will need to provide the access token. And as you can see, this will be an internal token that we never expose to the client side. It's only used directly on our servers to communicate with the Forge services. So we're using this internal token, which has loads of scopes enabled for it, including the one that enables you to get a list of all the hubs that the user has access to. So we can call this and then return that to the user. Then in case of each hubs, you know, we just pass in the ID of the hub and then get back the list of projects which are included there that the user has access to. And then get contents, you know, get back folders or perhaps files directly stored inside the root folder of the project. So we can use this API to get back all those items as well. And then for each item, we can also get back the versions which are available for that. So it's automatically handled by the storage services. When you upload a new version of the file, you know, it will keep track of those versions, and then you can also select which version you're interested in. For example, when you want to view a given file in the viewer, you can specify the version that you're interested in. So these are all the things that we are providing as part of the services. And now we need to also expose it to the client. So it's always a two-step process. There's the There are the services which are implementing the functionality, communicating directly from the server with the Forge services. And there's the controllers, which then expose the endpoint to the client-side code that you can call directly from the browser. So this time we are going to be adding a hubs controller.cs file. So just right click on controllers, add new item, class, and then rename it. Again, just copy all the content and let's see what it has. So let's just save everything before we lose anything. So here are the various endpoints. As you can see, they will be exposed on the API / hubs and then / the rest. So the get API / hubs will provide you with the list of hubs. As you can see from these endpoints, we are just simply using the service functionality that I showed like a minute ago. And some additional endpoints for a given hub, we can also get back then the projects. And for a specific project, we can get back the contents, so the folders and files which are directly in the root folder of the project. And then get back the further content. If the content, specific content we got back here was a folder, then of course we can also check the contents of the given folder. So that's what we are doing. That's what we are still doing here. And what we are doing here is getting the versions of a specific item. And that's really it. So I think in this step, that's all we did. And since we still haven't provided the user interface, therefore still expect the 404 message. But then afterwards, first we have to do the login because I closed the browser. If I have not closed the browser, then we could have just gone to the next part, which is about getting, the list of hubs that I have access to. But because I closed the browser, therefore we have to start with the login again. So let's go to this project and let's run it. So again, we are starting up the Chrome automatically. It's going to take us to the root of the web page. So of course we'll get a 404 message, which is expected. But then we are going to request a specific endpoint from the server, which will be this. So first of all, we need to log in. Okay. Have to also approve the access on my mobile. Yeah, so that's done. And now we can try the hubs. So let's go to the hubs and then we'll see the list of hubs that I have access to, hopefully. And there you go. So everything is working fine. As you can see, I have access to tons of hubs, Fusion, Team, Beam 360, ACC, all sorts of hubs that I have access to. So the application is working fine, and this is what we wanted to see. So all is good. And again, now it's your turn to implement these two things. These are very quick. It's just basically 2 files that you still need to add to your project, but you can just go through them, to study what they are doing exactly. And if you have any questions, of course, you can just type it in the Q&A panel and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And we arrived at the last session for today. So again, I hope you managed to complete the steps, which during the last sessions were implementing the logic for browsing the hubs. So implementing the Forge service, which is going to be communicating directly from the server with the Forge services, and also then exposing an endpoint, well, multiple endpoints actually for the hubs. so that you can get back the list of hubs, projects, folders, items, and the versions from the server. And now we are going to be adding the user interface to this application, including the viewer embedded in our web page. So these are the things we need to add the viewer logic. We're going to be implementing it in a file called viewer.js. Then add sidebar logic in the sidebar.js, application logic in the main.js file, and then the user interface element, the index.html, and the related style sheet as well, main.css. And then we can test the application and everything should be running fine, hopefully. I think I wanted to add something as well that I can't remember now. So we can just start going through those steps. We are getting back to the tutorial website. And this is the last section we need to follow. This is the viewer and the UI part. So first of all, we can create the viewer.js file. As I mentioned previously, all the files which we want to make available for the browser, the HTML file, JavaScript files, the style sheets, and all the rest will go inside the www root folder. So let's just create it straight away. I just close the browser and then stop the application. And then I can right click on www root, add new item. JavaScript file, rename it so it will be viewer.js. That part of the code should be pretty similar to the one we used yesterday. I think it might be actually exactly the same. No, it might be exactly the same. But anyway, so we created the file. So this is the viewer.js. We can just paste here the content. You know, it will have the same things. First of all, we need a function which will be fetching the token from our server. So we'll keep track of the token on our server side and pass it back. This is the public token, which we will be exposing to the client side. The internal token remains on the server because, you know, that has too many scopes enabled for it. It has too much power. It's better not to expose it to the client side because, you know, bad third parties might take advantage of it. And then we have the function to actually initialize the viewer. We just need to pass in the container, which would be a div inside our HTML page. And we are going to be initializing the viewer inside that. So we call the initializer and then create an actual instance of the GUI viewer 3D and then start the viewer. And then later on, when the user clicks on a specific version of a given file in the tree control that we will have on the left side of the web page, and we can also load that model. We just pass in the viewer instance and also the URN, which is the identifier of the given file version, which is stored on the various Autodesk storage systems, whether it's Fusion Team, BIM 360 Docs, or something else. And then we can just load the document. And then once the document loaded, we are just simply loading the default geometry inside it. As I've shown yesterday, if you attended the presentation yesterday, a given document or file version can contain multiple views. In case of Revit, DWF, maybe DWG files as well. So in case of a Revit file, you know, you have the 3D model. You can have multiple 3D models in the same file, and also various 2D sheets along with that. But in this case, we are just loading the default geometry that stands to be the main 3D view in case of, for example, a Revit model. So that's all we are doing here. And then we need to add the sidebar logic as well. This is going to www root, so right click on it, new item. This will be another JavaScript file. Just change the name to sidebar.js, and let's see what we are adding here. So just copy the whole content and place it here. So this is the part which is going to generate that, tree view on the left side of the web page, showing the various hubs and projects which are available. And you can see here the endpoints that it's calling. First, it's getting, all the hubs, then getting all the projects inside the hub, specific hub, then getting the contents inside the given project, or getting it from a tree, getting it for a folder. And if it's an item, we can also get back the given versions available for that given file. And then based on all this information, we are going to be generating a tree and then show that to the user. And then when a specific version, as you can see, we are checking if a version is selected, then we will be calling this on selection changed. I wonder where it's. Yeah, so when we are initializing the tree, then we can also pass in a function which will be called when a given version of a file is selected, and then we can react to it and we can display it in the viewer. So that's done as well. Then the application logic. So main.js. Add new item. That's another JavaScript file. And here you can see things like, fetching the profile for the user. Once the user logged in, we can also display the name of the user who's logged in. Just an extra touch. And then here we are initializing the viewer and also loading a given model into the viewer. As you can see, I was just showing you, but better quickly save everything. So as you've seen it in the sidebar, is implementing this init tree, where we can pass in the selected item and also what should happen when that given item is selected. So as you can see, here is the function which will be handling it. So in case this ID belongs to a file version, in that case, we are going to be calling this load model function, which is coming from the viewer.js file, and then display that given file version in the viewer. And now we just need to add the user interface as well. So this will be the style sheet. So let's add the style sheet here. Yeah, so many of them are just, for the various icons that the tree control will be using. It's defining those. And I think probably finally, that's the last thing, is adding the index HTML file as well with the actual user interface. Yeah, so here you can see the various parts. We have the header. It just provides a name for the website. And in the sidebar, that's where we are going to be adding the tree, which is displaying all the hubs, projects, and the rest available to the user. And here we are just referencing the scripts that we will need, including, of course, the viewer library, viewers in the JavaScript library. We're using Lodash, Inspire Tree. This is for the tree control that we are displaying on the left side. And this seems to be related to that as well. So these tools are for that. And that's really it. I don't think there's anything else left. So again, just like yesterday, if you also wanted to make sure that the favicon and the logo in the top left corner of the application is there, You can also download them and add it to the project to make it look a bit nicer. But even without that, it should already work. So we should be able to just start up the application, log in, and then it should display the various hubs and projects I have access to. So we can just try straight away. So no more 404 error messages. And now we have the login button, so I can just log in. It's going to be redirecting me to the Autodesk website where I can log in with my Autodesk ID. So I just need to fetch, I think it might already have my password. Yes, it's there. So I just need to approve it on my mobile phone quickly. And then it shows what sort of scopes I need for my app. So viewing my data and also viewing, displaying the model inside the viewer. So I'm going to allow it. And now it should be able to display all the various hubs I have access to. Let's just select something somewhere. I think I have something in this other one. Oh yeah, let's try this one. I usually like this Sterling engine, it looks quite nice. So you can also see when the given version of the file was created. You can see that was back in 2017, and this is the latest version of it, the second one. I think probably I just changed one of the materials in the model or something like that. And there you go. So we managed to list all the various hubs and projects I have access to. Then I can select the file, and if a given version is selected inside the tree control, then we start up the viewer, pass in the URM, which is the identifier of the given version on our storage system. And then the viewer will fetch all the viewables and then display it directly in your web page. So that's really it. Again, now it's your turn, and after a bit of time, there will be one more Q&A sessions in like 45 minutes or so. And I think that's when I'm going to, I'm just going to give some more info on, where you can find more information about this topic, also some information about the presentations which will be coming up tomorrow and then Thursday. So now it's your turn. Just add the user interface components, the JavaScript, HTML, and the style sheet files. And then your application should be finished and you should be able to run it, hopefully. Looks like we actually reached the final Q&A part, where I'm going to finish the presentation part as well. So I hope now all of you managed to implement the full application and it's running fine on your side as well. So now just some info about the upcoming trainings. As I mentioned, tomorrow it will be all about the viewer, adding extensions to it that, can provide some additional functionality for it. And it's going to be focusing on creating dashboards, which means that, we're extracting properties from the original model. And then based on those properties, we are going to be creating, dashboards, various charts, maybe pie charts based on, for example, the material of the various objects inside the model. And then on Thursday, we'll talk about configurators. This will be actually based on the old samples, the old tutorial website. So if you go back to the Learn Forge, I think I already opened it somewhere, but I can just open it again. So Learn Forge, yeah, we did not manage to migrate that to the new tutorial website, so that will be based on this old tutorial, which enables you to create, Autodesk specific file formats, modify existing files, and so on. And one of the questions came up about the sample, which is actually extracting, additional information from Revit models using the Revit API. So that would as well need to be done using the Design Automation API, if that's what you wanted to do, extract custom properties from Revit models. So this is what Thursday's tutorial will be about. And where you can find more help, you can just go on Stack Overflow if you don't mind, publicly discussing your questions or your issues with the various Forge topics. So you just need to make sure that you're using the right tags for your questions, so that it's going to show up in our internal, support system. So we will be notified that you're asking something on Stack Overflow, and we can get back to you there. But if you don't want to ask something publicly because it might be including some private information or something, in that case, you can also send us an email, forge.help@autodesk.com, and that should be listed on the Get Help site as well. So if you go to Forge, actually that's probably in the FAQ, in the FAQ section. So support and then FAQ. So if you scroll down, you're going to see that the email address. I know that's the sales. So forge.help@autodesk.com. You can send there an email as well. And the Stack Overflow one is the support Get Help. And that will help you with, getting the right tags for your Stack Overflow question. Yeah, that's it really. And after the event, we are going to be sending links to the YouTube to the recordings that we are going to be posting on YouTube. I think we'll probably blog about it as well on our blog, on forge.autodesk.com/blog. And we'll send out a survey link as well to get some feedback from you regarding these sessions. And then if you want to learn more, beyond this week, beyond the tutorials that we are delivering this week, then you can try to attend one of the accelerators. These are 1-week events that you can apply for. You just have to provide information about what kind of project you're trying to implement using Forge. And then we'll also set up a Slack account for all the attendees where we can, discuss things live. We can set up Zoom meetings if needed. So throughout the week, we are helping you to get your project finished. And some additional resources, you can also check out the Forge Lightning talks. This is also somewhere on the blog, but you can access it directly through forge.autodesk.com/lightning-talks. And here's the link again for the Forge blog website, forge.autodesk.com/blog. There are loads of blog articles related to all sorts of questions that we got from our customers. So it's definitely worth going through those as well. And that's about it. So thanks for attending. If you have any more questions, I will be, around for quite a while. For I don't know what time is it now? For another 20 minutes or so. So you can still ask me questions. Yeah, so that is all for today. So thanks for joining this webcast today. And then, well, bye everyone.